Now here's part 2 of my extension tube series of videos. In part 2 we're going to go over what exactly is an extension tube and what it does and how you can use one for macro photography. Well, let me use this lens to show you exactly what's going on when you focus closer. See, this lens is, let's focus it to infinity. It's focused to infinity. The glass elements are back as far as they can go back to its register distance. Register distance is the distance that the lens needs to be from the film or sensor to focus to infinity. Now as you focus this lens closer, let's get this where you can see it, there we go. As I focus closer, the glass elements in the lens are moving forward. Okay, so that's infinity. You want to focus closer, you got to move the lens elements farther away from the sensor or film. So how do you make a lens focus even closer than what it will do on its own? What you need to do is get the lens farther away from the camera body. That's what these extension tubes are for. You mount one between the lens and the camera body. Now, a disadvantage is while the tubes are on there, you cannot focus on anything far away, anything distant. So, you put your tube on there and get a macro shot of a butterfly, you're not going to just turn around and get a shot of the distant mountain. You're going to have to take the tube off, which is a hassle. But if you can't afford or don't want to spend the money on a dedicated macro lens that can go from macro range to infinity, extension tubes are an inexpensive option. Now, as far as what size tube do you need, extension tubes come in different lengths or thicknesses. Like this tube is 14 millimeters. It says 14 right here, and this Kenko is 25 millimeters. As you can see, the 25 there. They usually have the length or thickness in millimeters printed on the side. Well, let's try to keep this simple and short. Let's say with the lens focused at infinity, you need the same amount of extension as the focal length of the lens to get to 1:1 reproduction ratio. For example, with a 50 millimeter lens, you need 50 millimeters of extension to get to 1:1. With a 200 millimeter lens, you need 200 millimeters of extension to get to 1:1. With a 24 millimeter lens, you only need 24 millimeters of extension to get to 1:1. So you ask which lens is best suited for extension tubes, which focal length? Well, it's somewhere in the middle is your happy medium, because what happens is if your lens is too long, let's say for example you're using a 300 millimeter lens, well you're going to have 300 millimeters of extension to get to 1:1, which is almost 12 inches, which you're probably not going to you're not going to do that. I mean, you'd have to stack so many tubes together. You'd have to have a bellows, which wouldn't be practical to carry around in the field. And if your focal length of your lens is too short, let's say you're using a 20 millimeter lens, even with the shortest extension tube like this 14 or even a shorter one, it's probably going to be too much extension. What you're going to have is virtually no working distance. Working distance is the distance between the subject and the front of the lens. If your lens is too short, it doesn't take much extension to get to the reproduction ratio desired, but then your working distance is almost nothing. There's even some scenarios where if you have too much extension with a real short lens, it won't focus even if the subject is touching the front of the lens. The subject would have to be inside the lens for it to focus. So what's that happy medium? In my opinion, I think about 50 to 135 millimeter lenses work good with extension tubes. That way you still have a decent amount of working distance and you don't need too much extension to get to the desired reproduction ratio. Now, something I'll throw out is You can use a small tube on a long, like a 300 millimeter lens. That would help you a lot of times, and it would allow you to focus a little closer than what the lens focuses on its own, which can be beneficial sometimes. But as far as getting into macro mode, getting into larger reproduction ratios with a super long lens, it's using tubes is not a good idea. You probably want to use a close-up lens that screws on the front thread of your lens. Of course, that's another topic for another video. Now what I'm about to do now is I'm going to take this 50 millimeter 1.8 lens. I'm going to mount it on the camera that's shooting this video, and I'm going to set it to its closest focus distance and shoot a video of a tape measure. Then I'm going to stop the video, mount this Kenko 25 millimeter extension tube in between the camera and the lens, which would give us about half life size, 1 to 2, with the lens focused to infinity. And I'm going to shoot the tape measure again so you can see the difference. Now this is the 50 millimeter 1.8 lens I just showed you. It's mounted on the camera. I've got the lens set to its minimum focus distance, and you can see that's the tightest crop you can get. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this Kenko extension tube between the camera and the lens and shoot the tape measure again. Now this is with the extension tube mounted, and the lens is focused at infinity, and I'm much closer to the tape measure now. The front of the lens is about 5 inches from the tape measure. Now the tube is still on, and the lens is focused at its minimum focus distance, and I'm a little closer to the tape measure. I'm about 4 inches away from the front of the lens is about 4 inches away from the tape measure.